Welcome to Human Risk, a podcast dedicated to the understanding of human behaviour as a risk. Here's your host, Christian Hunt.
Hello and welcome back to the Human Risk podcast. On this episode, I'm going to focus on, well, what else? The coronavirus. Not only are we all having to change the way we work, but we're even having to change the way we live our lives. And it's that aspect of change necessitated by the current situation that I'm going to explore further on this episode. I know that many of you work in areas like risk and compliance, and that the coronavirus makes an already difficult job that much harder. I've been helping a number of my clients think about how they can adapt their existing programs to reflect the new ways of working, and I thought it might be useful to share some insights from that on this podcast. To help me explore the topic, I'm joined by Ricardo Pellafone. He was my guest on episode 4 of the podcast and is the founder of The Broadcat, a compliance design company. Like me, Ricardo's been a compliance officer and so understands the dynamics of the role. He's also one of the most innovative thinkers in this space and has some powerful insights on the current situation. If you've seen any of his social media videos or read any of his blogs, you'll know that he's also highly entertaining. And our aim in recording this is to help you think about how you can adjust your risk and compliance programs to meet the demands of the new environment. Even if you don't work in those disciplines, there are hopefully some lessons and ideas for you to think about in your own role. In the spirit of changing the way we do things, Ricardo and I recorded this as a video and will be releasing clips from the show on social media. Unfortunately, that means the audio quality isn't as high as it would normally be, so my apologies for that. But hopefully the quality of the content more than makes up for it. As ever, do let us know if there are any particular areas you'd like us to explore in more detail, or if you have any thoughts or questions. In the meantime, enjoy listening to my discussion with Ricardo Pellafone on risk and compliance in the coronavirus. So, Ricardo, look, I think we thought it'd be a good idea to get together and talk about some of the dynamics that we're seeing at the moment, and particularly, how people are responding to what is quite an unusual situation.
Yeah, I don't know what it's like over in London. It is weird in Dallas right now. It's probably a safe way to say it. So I'm at home. If you're watching this, so we're trying to record the video as well as audio on this one. So if you're watching it, you've seen some of the videos I've done in the past. It's obviously a different background. Now it's just a bunch of doors. I have a room in my house is just doors to other rooms, I guess. And if you're not watching it and you just know that Christian has introduced me as someone from the state of Texas, I'm sitting on a throne of guns. But
awesome.
I think that's the stereotype Europeans have of us. Yeah, that would just.
Well, I'm going to respond to that, and again, if the video works, so I'm drinking afternoon tea because we are recording this of an afternoon. But no, look, I think your national stereotypes aside, I think your point is this is a really unorthodox situation because. We're dealing with a situation that is causing business disruption, it's causing personal disruption, it's causing personal anxiety. Nobody quite knows what's going on, and there's an overload of information, and we're being the government is telling both, in both locations and globally, governments are telling people what to do in ways that are unusual.
Yeah, and I think too, we have people at different stages of accepting what's going on. I don't know at what point, I'd be interested in what point for you were you like, oh, this is a big thing. For me, it was, I guess, 2 Wednesdays ago. So it was the day the WHO declared a pandemic. Prior to that point, and I lived in the Emirates during MERS, and I was like, oh, whatever, like this stuff's happened before. Like it's always localized and they take care of it. And then they declared it a pandemic, and I was talking to someone in Switzerland that day, and they were like, no, this is different. And that person also lived in the Middle East in MERS. And I was like, oh, crap. And then when the pandemic got declared, that's when suddenly it was like, this is a real thing. But other people I know, it took them like several days more. And I still think there's a lot of people out there that are like adapting to it. Some of that might be rational resistance. Some of it too, and this is kind of like the thing that we talk about in behavior. Some of it might just be people are still in the denial stage of grief, of mourning the sense of normalcy and the routine that they used to have. And so they're still at that first stage of like pretending nothing's happened, which is it's very interesting watching this play out. Because I think to try and mobilize people, you kind of have to have everyone accepting like what the status quo is. And I don't know that that's I think it's closer to universal now, but it's not quite there.
Right. And I think there are, there's a whole host of drivers there where you can sort of, maybe you don't trust your government. Maybe this is just a pain in the backside because you've had to cancel stuff. We've all got, I've had to cancel various trips. And so there's financial costs, and we worry about those things. And we've got enough personal concerns and irritations around this, let alone for some of the things that we need to do from a work context.
I think too, you think of it in terms of like Maslow's hierarchy, it pushes us all down a couple ranks that we don't want to be, right? So a lot of us, we had this assumption that and this is really, honestly, probably for people who are listening to this, who are folks who can work remotely and are probably within fairly large organizations and a risk or compliance professional by background. So if that describes you, you're probably, 2 to 3 weeks ago, you were probably in a state where your concern was going to be more the higher level stuff with like self-actualization and your identity. And suddenly to have us all pushed down to like survival and like the bottom rungs of that is very disorienting to deal with. And I think that's something too that's just kind of important to acknowledge that like you can always find someone that's worse off than you, but you can also always find someone that's better off than you. I think everyone, regardless of where you started from, is in a different position today, and that's disorienting and scary to deal with, just on a personal level as well.
Right, and I think there's an interesting piece here. I've been, it's been intriguing watching celebrities catching this thing, and you cannot isolate yourself from it. And I think if you look at Prince Charles has it in the UK, for example, and so this isn't a case of you can exclude yourself from it. And I think there's some interesting changes where it is really leveling out people, in terms of their vulnerabilities. And we are suddenly very reliant on people who are probably in very lowly paid jobs, whether that's healthcare professionals or whether that's delivery people. And so there is a real shift here, a sense of vulnerability. And I think it doesn't matter what status you are within an organization or within society or how much money you have, this thing poses a threat to you.
Yeah, death is definitely the great leveler, right? And so like that's like you can't buy your way out of that. And I think that's something that, it's just the only thing that seems to be the delta right now is youth. I think that is kind of starting to back off. It was interesting seeing, so I'm turned 39 this month, which makes me the oldest millennial. And it was seeing all the stuff happen in spring break. One, we got blamed for that, even though all millennials are older than that now. If you don't know what I'm talking about, there was this thing that was like all these shots of all people crowding the beaches in Florida and Texas during spring break. So it was, I guess the one bright spot was at least we are no longer the generational villain there. But like, it was super interesting. I thought those things were really unhelpful too. So I saw, so doing those shots, right? So like in times like this, everyone wants a villain that's like a knowable villain versus like the scary unknown of a disease. And so the people on the beaches and people who aren't like social distancing, or what are we calling out, physical distancing, are easy scapegoats and villains, but it's also kind of unhelpful. So from two perspectives, I'd say. So for number one, I thought, so like, I get the idea that it's kind of satisfying to see like these kids on spring break say dumb things on camera. I think it's also like they're kids. Like kids are going to like, I don't know about you. I was like a total moron when I was like 21. So like, I think this is part of being young. And so I think having a permanent record of like, this is someone that's like, I don't think that, I thought that was a little like unnecessarily cruel to them. I think you could just show the whole mess of them without singling out specific folks, just given the permanence of that type of record. The second thing I would say is that like, so what we know on how people respond to norms, showing really crowded beaches is really unhelpful, right? Because now it's not just like saying, oh, some people are doing it, but like, it looks like a lot of people aren't taking this seriously. So if you're that type of situational wrongdoer and you're looking to others for cues and you see a flooded beach of people, then, you're probably going to say that's okay to do too. So it's been interesting watching that the type of stuff that plays well in the media is you have identifiable villains who are human villains, and you have like, you show like how many of them are doing it, but that's also the thing we know is creates the opposite norm that we want. And so we're in this very weird situation right now where the stuff that is interesting to listen to and watch is having the opposite effect of what we want.
Right. And as you were talking, it struck me that if you have somebody who is engaging in a certain behavior, if you go and interview them about that behavior, the likelihood of them going, I've been an idiot and made a mistake, right, is pretty marginal.
Right.
And so there's a predictability to that.
It's just, I mean, I guess that's my piece of it. So like, it's weird to take up water for people that were doing things I think are abhorrent, but it's like, what are we accomplishing other than making that person like permanently unemployable? Like,
Right.
it seems like, so it just seems like, kind of like dunking on some kid or like a whole bunch of them. So I don't know. But like, I do think, like, I saw that stuff initially, I was just like, I got really mad and self-righteous, like we all did. And then I thought about it and I was like, well, this is just making it clear that lots of people are doing this. And so what I know about social norms is that makes it more likely for other people to do it. And yes, it did make me really hate that one specific kid a lot. But then I was like, but why? That's like one kid out of all of them. And so it's been interesting seeing how the media feeds into this separately from other things. Separately from past endemics that we've had or pandemics that we've had.
Right, and I think it's much easier to go shoot shots of people doing things you don't want rather than the opposite, which is the compliant. There are vast swathes of the population doing the right thing.
Yeah, and I think so. What's particularly curious about this, though, so like you think about those three different types of folks that Yuval talks about, right? So you get the generally moral people, situational wrongdoers, and the bad actors. The problem with a pandemic that spreads very easily is you just need a very small number of bad actors. So you kind of have to use you have to really tackle all three problems at once. I think the analog of typhoid Mary is really apt, right? So you had like one person who was the asymptomatic carrier of typhoid who infected like a lot of people because she was like, whatever. Like the story of that is so fascinating where you see someone so resistant to helping out. And so I do think there's a part where we have a lot of folks who are generally moral, who are trying to, distance themselves and protect others. You have situational wrongdoers who will read that norm that as it becomes more popular, they'll get in line. But where I think we really need to see some action too is like you do need some legal enforcement of it as well. As long as it is purely voluntary, you will get a couple bad actors. And there's just folks that are there's that third bucket of people. And they can spread it quite a bit as well. So I think I don't know that we've seen all three parts of that toolkit fully come out yet. I know that's very difficult in the West too, because like we generally don't have in our government toolkit, make everyone stay in their house. Like we're not set up for that. That's very counter to democratic values in Europe and in North America. And so, but it's going to be a challenge because like in the absence of that, it's really, really hard to get people to get people who are not inclined to the folks who are really believing this is a conspiracy theory or like a deep state thing or what, pick your name for someone who pick whatever reason you have for thinking this is not a real thing. There's just some element where at least a critical mass of those people also probably need to fall in line. That's only going to happen by through legal force.
Right. And of course, that's an interesting thing because governments, typically governments step in and ban things or prevent behaviors that are bad. So let's take the controls around smoking, for example, or alcohol or any of these things.
Yep.
And so here you've got an interesting example where the message coming out of government is, these are the behaviors we need. And there isn't anything to enforce it. And we had this situation in the UK where the government advice was do not go to bars, do not go to clubs, do not go to, and they didn't shut them. And so there was this weird thing where sort of, people could legitimately say, well, look, if it was that bad, surely they would have shut these things down.
Yep. I do think that especially as states grow larger, and administrative states in particular, there are people that take cues from that stuff too. Like, hey, if it was really that bad, they would have done this. You see that response. I know you posted on LinkedIn about this. There's lots of other examples of this too, where they're like, hey, we're going to close stuff tomorrow. So today everyone runs out and does it.
Right. Yeah. If your opportunity is about to time expire, then you're going to take advantage of it. And we saw that in Italy, right, where they go, there's going to be a lockdown in 48 hours time or whatever it was. And then everybody heads for the train station and makes the situation a damn sight worse because they're spreading the virus everywhere. But they're also in that confined space as they stampede to get to the station.
Yeah, and this is so. What I find really interesting about this time as being in this field, right, is how this is essentially like the world's largest like behavioral compliance experiment in the world, right? Because you have all the same things that folks try and do within commercial firms, but at a much, much bigger scale. Of how are we going to get everyone, like no matter how complicated and big and global your organization is, it is not as hard as trying to get everyone in the entire world to like stop moving for like several weeks at a time. Like that is just a different thing altogether. And it is something where in the absence of like a vaccine or effective medication, like the behavior, I mean, we're using like 19th century quarantine methods right now because it's all we have. And so the behavior matters a lot to do it. I think it gives a really apt analogy for thinking about these things too. I think that, obviously my area is within compliance guidance. My work is really, and my company's work is really about how do we communicate these things to employees and others within an organization. And I think, the historic analogy that's really been used is very akin to like school. Like if you look at how all these compliance guidance flows down to people, it tends to have all the indicia of schooling. It's courses, there's quizzes, there's all these, sometimes there's a learning path. Like it looks very, very similar to what you would do in university or grade school. An alternate analogy is public health. And the way public health communicates stuff is like radically different, where it is, instead of talking about like frameworks and concepts, it's like, here's what you need to do. And this is what we need you to do. They tell you exactly what they're asking you to do. So that it's about behavior. The behavior is very clearly described. And then the format of it, and this is what I find is most interesting, the format is always like this really, or almost always this really lightweight format and I think the driver for that is iteration. So this isn't working, let's iterate to this thing instead. So you see that in how the way they talk about it has changed over time because they really are flowing from, we need this behavior to happen. We don't know what message is going to work, and no message is going to work forever. So let's keep the format really lightweight and iterate rapidly. And so it's like, simple words, graphics, stuff that you can print out in like one page versus, the traditional compliance and risk courses are like, 20 to 40 minutes. You have to sit at a computer. There's a quiz at the end. And it's about like, and it doesn't tell you what to do. And so I find my hope is that one of the bright spots that comes out of this, at least for our field, is that we get a lot smarter and use that analogy instead. That the analogy here is not school. We're not trying to make people compliance risk officers. We're trying to get them to behave in very specific ways. In the public health, if you watch what's happening right now, it's this really elegant example of how to do it well.
Right, and I think it's as you say, it's very responsive, and they are, you kind of let your imagination run riot a bit, right? Because actually, the more serious the message, the more playful in some respects it needs to be. And so it's a logical extension of what we see with airline safety briefings, right? Where historically you sit on a plane, nobody pays any attention at all, partly because you don't want to listen as to what's going to happen in an accident, and partly because that accident is not going to happen in your flight because this is a safe activity anyway, isn't it? And what have they done there? Well, they've kind of, used cartoons, they've allowed the staff a bit of latitude to make it more fun and engaging, to try and get you to and what I think is really interesting about this piece here is that it's the authorities that have started with the fun, interesting stuff. And there's people riffing off that and taking it even further with their own piece. But there is this sense of the real seriousness of the message doesn't have to be supported by a seriousness of presentation. It's exactly the opposite, actually. You can drive to people's subconscious by using, as you say, things that we would associate with communicating with kids or with kind of entertainment.
Yeah. And I think too, I think what I see is that there's and this is where I'll give you the airline analogy as to that I'll pick up on that in a second. But where I think having a lightweight format matters is that you don't have to be all in on one type of message. So some people do respond really well to seriousness. Some people respond really well to playfulness. I think what's nice about having a lightweight format as they push this messaging out is they don't have to have like one thing that works for everybody. And I think that is, and I think especially when we're looking at how we do things within organizations on issuing guidance to people, we massively overweight this idea of having like a silver bullet. Like this one training we do for every single employee, that's the one shot we get all year at it. And well, if the amount of time that we spent doing multiple different trainings, if the amount of time we spent creating that one really way too heavyweight, way too complicated, way too media-rich training was broken up into lots of simpler messages, you get better results. And then you'd also be able to see which people really respond to instead of just kind of guessing. And so I think there's an element where when you keep stuff lightweight, and you see this with the public health response, you're also able to figure out very rapidly what's working, what isn't, and calibrate. On airlines, though, there's this trade-off when they make the video versus doing it live. So doing it live depends on the person. The video depends on just that one time working. And so Southwest Airlines, I believe, still does entirely live announcements. And you've probably seen on YouTube, like where they've had these like viral announcements where you will get a really creative flight attendant that just like does it in a really fun way, and someone films it and it goes viral. That's really great because it also doesn't have to work for everybody. So there's like all these different instances of it, and there's also novelty because you have a different person delivering it every time. I tend to fly the same couple airlines all the time. I know all of their videos by heart. And so I definitely don't watch them anymore because I know. And so I think too, when we're thinking about delivering message, I do think there's an element of novelty that matters a lot too. I think I've never seen research on this. I've tried looking in the advertising space because I would think that's where it would exist on ad fatigue. So when people become blind to a message because they've seen it too much, they just start to incorporate it. Everyone seems to agree that's a phenomenon that occurs. Certainly in your own life, you can probably think of like, oh, you just, after you see it like 3 times, you stop paying attention to it. There's this point where you see it enough that you really want to check it out, and then afterwards you just totally ignore it. No, I haven't seen any research on exactly how long that takes. But I do think just another thing about being able to keep the messaging, the public health messaging, compliance messaging lightweight is that you don't overinvest in a single message, because that message is eventually going to need to change.
Right. And it's interesting when you look at advertising, right? Because typically the advertising thing is around, we want you to buy this product. Mm-hmm. So a single desirable outcome that is measurable at that piece. Many of the compliance objectives you want will require people to respect a whole host of things and be thinking about a range of dynamics. And so it's quite a challenging bit. And what we tend to do is to sort of think, well, I need to drill in every single aspect of these pieces. And actually, I think there is an interesting lesson from advertising here, which is kind of going, let's focus down on the thing that we want people really to do. What's really mission critical here? And let's get that message across to them. And I find it interesting when you look at irritating ads. Like, people go, that's a really irritating ad. But they run those irritating ads because they work. Right? And they've worked out how to drill into the psyche. And what I find really interesting about compliance campaigns or training is it's kind of, let's just do it and hope it works. Right? There isn't any sense of let's spend a little bit of time going, has this landed? Right? Yeah. And it's almost like there's a badge of honor in some cases where people, if people come back to you, the only time they come back to you is to tell you how dull the training was, right? And it's got to be really bad for people to complain, because their threshold is already, when it comes to compliance stuff, you're already going to go, this is going to be boring. We know how people respond. Send an email with the word compliance in the subject line. There are going to be a whole host of people that aren't even going to engage on it. And so I think there's something interesting about, you say we need to look at advertising. I think that piece is often not thought about. And advertisers are good at landing messages. Sometimes they get it hideously wrong, right? Yeah. But they're good at landing stuff. And I think that there's a, that idea of going and looking in that space, I think is undervalued and underappreciated.
I think so. So I think there's maybe 2 drivers for that. I think the first is that I think people aren't really sure what message to have. So I do think that you'll see some folks who have tried to experiment with like an advertising approach, but the message that they have is basically the same as the courses. So it still doesn't tell you what to do. So there's a piece here where it's like, I think sometimes we adopt the wrong thing from advertising. We look at the way advertisers think, and then we say, okay, so we need this to be, we need people to have a positive emotional association with the concept of compliance. Rather than saying, I think what I'm thinking is, what I like about advertising is the rapid testing and the data piece of it. That like, it's not just like, hey, we're going to do this one thing and hope it works for everybody. Because like, I'll sometimes get that question from people. It's like, is this going to work for everybody? I think the last time I presented, actually, I think you saw me do this. I was like, no, nothing works for everybody. Like, if you have like 10,000 people and like no one tells you that like it didn't work for them, then it didn't, like no one paid attention to it. Like there's this like statistic. I mean, if you think about something like, so I'm filming this on my end with a big Mac, whatever the big desktop one is, iMac something or other. And like, there are people who feel very passionate about Macs and people who feel very passionate about PCs. Even better analog is probably like Chevrolet and GMC, which are essentially the exact same car with like different badges and different trim levels. But like they're like the Sierra. I used to own a Silverado. The Silverado and the Sierra are like the same pickup truck. The Sierra is a little bit nicer. And people just feel very strongly about that stuff. So like the idea that someone's going to like everything, you should do one thing and that's going to work for everybody is just silly. Where I think we can really borrow from advertisers and learn a lot is in like Geico. I think does this really well in the US, where they have like a huge variety of ads. And some of them are very serious and are just like insurance stuff. And others are like these very goofy, high concept ads. And because it's a product that has to appeal like compliance to so many people, so they don't go all in on one message and assume that will work. Because like nothing works like that for everybody. And in compliance, you don't need to have absolutely everybody on board. We need like a lot of them. And so I think my hope is that we come out of this and critically reflect on like, wow, how did the public health agencies message this? And it's through a lot of different messages, rapidly iterated in a very lightweight format. And it certainly was not so the analogy I gave, so I filmed the video on this yesterday. So the analogy I gave there, if you see that video too, I'm recycling this joke because the environment's important, but like, it would be like, if instead of telling you to wash your hands, WHO just was like, here's a 30-minute e-learning course on epidemiology. Like, that's basically how we do stuff right now, is we give these really long, heavyweight things about concepts to try and make people have the same skill set as us, instead of saying, like, no. It would be great, of course, if we all understood like the ins and outs of how disease vectors work. So that way, like, we would all, of course, be better. But like, that also is like never, ever, ever going to happen. That would fail. And really all we need people to do to solve the problem in front of our face is to get everyone to wash their hands a lot, stay inside their house. And those are simple messages people can understand, and they can be delivered in a huge variety of different formats.
Right, and I think the interesting bit there is, as you say, right, for those obsessives who want to understand this, right, who just go, why is hand washing help, right?
Yeah.
There's an opportunity to do that research if you are interested. But what we're not doing is forcing everybody to kind of go, you must understand the research. And I, the number of compliance trainings I've done where it's, you're kind of quizzed on stuff like, how many years will you go to jail if you fail to comply with this piece, right? And you sort of go, that's an irrelevancy, right? All they need to know is this is not something to do, right? They shouldn't be arbitraging how many years you go to jail for breaching this. And, that's only 5 years, so I'll do that as opposed to the one that's 10 years. And I think there's so many things that are sort of, because you're absolutely right, right? There's, and I think it's well intentioned. It's kind of like, I need you to understand this thing and where it comes from and what the basis for it is. And actually you don't, right? You really, really don't need to understand that because they have enough other stuff going on. It's like literally, what are the simple steps that need to be taken? And if they want to quiz you on it and find out more, then you can give them that information on the side.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, we have just in how we talk about compliance in complex organizations, like regulatory compliance, we have just wandered so far away from the core mission of influencing behavior. And we've wandered really into education and entertainment with behavior, and when we do talk about behavior, it's like, well, more people call the hotline. Well, you could also get that to happen if you just walked around all of your sites with like a big pot and a wooden spoon, like banged it. And because all you're doing is being top of mind for people. You don't need to give people like an e-learning course, or you don't need to do like a live training world tour for that. Like if your only metric is more people interacted with us, regardless of issue, you can drive salience in a much simpler way than that. And that's just by being by being loud. It's not that's setting the bar way too low for behavior. When we talk about behavior, and also I think it's really unfair to employees to put the burden on them that they are the ones that have to issue spot everything, which is hotlines are fail safe. Like if people are calling the hotline, if that's the primary way that you think about behavior, then at your organization, then you're in trouble. It would be like if, and I'm definitely recycling this joke too. It would be like if the DHS here in the U.S., our Homeland Security and TSA, the travel administration, if instead of having like TSA agents and like dogs that like you can't pet, but like you should, because they look, you know what I mean? Like I always want to pet them. Anyway, like dogs, like bomb sniffing dogs, and like X-ray machines and those backscatter machines. Instead of having all of that, we just had posters that were like, hey everyone, if you see something sketchy, call. Like that, like if the only anti-terrorism activity we did was putting up posters and asking people to call, if that's how we got data on it, we would be in a world of hurt. That is a fail-safe when everything else doesn't work. And I think that's like when we talk about behavior, it has to be at the very granular level of like, okay, this is a statute that we don't want to violate. How might we violate that? Who would do it? What would they be doing? That's the behavior. And so like it's that level. And I think that drill down very rarely happens. It just stays at the statutory level. Let's go, or sometimes we take even a higher level of abstraction and talk about risks. And then we're going to break it into like, okay, everyone, like now this is an anti-corruption course. Well, what does that mean to anybody else? Like practically it means that these are the 10 things we can't have you do. Those are the 10 things we should talk about. They don't even need to know that's an anti-corruption issue.
Right. And so two thoughts on the back of that is that the first one is that engagement piece, right? We had hundreds of people calling us up. Well, it depends why they're calling you up, right? They might be calling up because they have no clue what to do, because the instructions you've issued with them are confusing and complicated. And so if you're just looking at how much engagement have we got, right? Yeah. You can generate engagement by making something really difficult to understand. And we've all seen this where, you go through complicated customer service. Look, our customer service track record is amazing because we have all these people calling us up. No, it's not, because you forced them to call you up, right? If it was clear, simple to understand, and your product was working the way it should do, you wouldn't have that. So that's the first kind of thought I had. And the second one is, I agree totally with the characterization of training as, we are now going to teach you subject A.
Yeah.
And of course, subject A, that comes from a theoretician's view of the world. People don't go into meetings where the only thing they have to think about is topic A, right? They have to manage the range of these things. And the way stuff often gets presented is, we're now going to teach you about this risk, and then we'll teach you about that risk, and then we'll teach you about that one. And you kind of go, all of those things kick in at the same time. And people need to have all of them at the top of their mind. And if you've presented them to them in a sort of, in a way that would look good in a library, right? So we've dealt with this. We've done, it's almost like teaching people new words, right? So here are a training course. So today you're going to do A to Z, A to F, right? And then tomorrow you're going to do G to L. And you sort of, that's not the way language operates. And we have all these conflicting pieces. And I think often it's like, it suits us to have a thematic training on X. But you just sit there and you laser focus on that one thing. But X sits alongside a whole load of other letters that are equally relevant at a given point in time. And of course, the risk you do if you present things along that individual topic is that the thing they'll remember is the last thing you taught them, if indeed they've paid attention. And so the other stuff drops off the end of the conveyor belt. And it isn't, people aren't thinking about this, I don't like this word, but holistically.
Yeah. Well, so yes, absolutely. I think two things that you said I want to pick up on. When you're thinking about engagement, another analog I'd give is marketing. So I run a company, we get leads coming in through the website. More leads is not necessarily good. So I want leads that are good fit. I want qualified leads that are good fit for the company. Or for us, that's because I don't care about people just visiting our website is like, okay, but like people visiting our website who are a good fit for our products and services is even better. And so I think that's when you're talking about like hotline engagement, to that point, like, just the fact that more people call, what is the quality of the calls? And the reality is that all the data I've seen, I used to run 2 hotlines before I started this company. All the data I've seen, and certainly my own experience, is that like the vast majority of people calling a hotline are for HR issues. And you're giving them a resource to be like, and sometimes there actually is a real compliance issue buried in there, but cloaked within this framework of like issues with their manager. But the vast majority of it is HR stuff. And so the fact that more of it's going up doesn't necessarily mean if our remit is the regulatory legal compliance side of it, that's getting done. So I do think that we were talking about hotline calls. Yes, more is better than fewer, but more itself that's not really getting the job done. The other thing I talk about when you pick up on is the idea of this, how people are presenting information. Absolutely, I think the concept there is framing too. is that when we're talking about like, now we're going to teach you about this concept and this concept, we are framing it around our own thing. And for them to be able to apply it, they then, the audience then has to do the work of reframing it into their own context. That is the biggest gap where we focus on in our work, and that I see that is just missed almost everywhere. That the idea that someone whose job is hitting a sales target every month or every quarter is going to invest the time to sit through a 2-hour course or hour course, whatever, on something, and then be like, okay, well, let me just take a beat. And, I'm not going to try and hit my numbers this month, even though I'll get fired if I don't hit them. Instead, I'm going to figure out how this applies to my job. Like that's never going to happen anywhere. It's a ridiculous thing to say that the operational business people, it's their responsibility to reframe compliance concepts around their job. If that's true, what does the compliance team do? Because then the compliance team's job gets reduced to things that can be very easily outsourced to outside counsel and vendors. If all you're doing is telling people about risks, outside lawyers and training vendors can do that cheaper. You do not need full-time employees to do that. Where in-house team adds a huge amount of value is that translation of saying, we have these risks, this is what our business practically does. Now I'm going to translate it so that business people can just focus on doing their jobs compliantly instead of trying to mimic my job.
Right, and it's I find it really interesting because there's a sort of risk transfer that goes on, right? Which is there's a regulation, we need to comply with it. So what do? We will put the regulation in our company policies so that we can make sure we're covered, and then we will pass those policies on. And the answer to people, if you need to know what you need to do, look at the policy. And you kind of go, if that policy has literally just copied the regulation, you might as well go read the regulation. Right.
Yeah.
And that's not. There are no other contexts in the world where we ask people to do that. Right.
I disagree with that. I think there is a context where that happens, but it's not a good one. So
okay.
The context, it's click wrap. So the context, like what you're describing, is liability shifting. That is what we do as lawyers when we're saying we actually don't expect you to read this. We just want to be able to hold you accountable for it. And so anytime you have to go through a user agreement, like a EULA, like end user license agreement, or like you go and rent a car and they give you that brochure stuff that you're never going to read, or you give like a contract that's non-negotiable to people because it's like standardized commercial paper. All of that stuff is designed to telegraph to someone, we don't care what you do. We just want to be able to hold you accountable for it. A lot of corporate policies and a lot of corporate compliance guidance mimics that format. And so if you get that as an employee and you see it's like a 20-page policy and it's like, you got to sign this, like the message you receive is not that like the company really cares if you do it or not. The message you receive is that, gee, this looks really similar to any other time in my life when a lawyer has made me sign something. Because that's the frame. You're coming into this frame of like, well, what do you do outside of work? Well, people give you stuff that looks like this, and they just care if you sign it, and yet probably nothing bad's going to happen, so it's fine, and you accept the liability. That approach to compliance is a very legal-driven one, meaning it is driven by an effort to not change employee behavior, but to have a legal reason to terminate an employee and try and shift liability to them. I don't think that works. The whole base obviously doesn't work for behavior. I don't even think that works to shift liability. I think you're seeing regulators take an increasingly skeptical eye with like, yeah, like me, that feels like very like 18th century King's Bench type stuff where people would be like, well, you said the magic word, so therefore you're not legally liable. Like I've seen like, I don't see that approach being really reflected, especially I'll say at least over here, in the wake of Hui Chen being at the Department of Justice, taking a very skeptical view to that type of like, okay, so you put the right paper in place, therefore, yes, it was this one person's fault and like not the enterprise that managed them.
And you make a lovely point. I was trying to find good examples, but I think what's really valuable about that insight is if you think about car rental, right? That is an antagonistic relationship. Okay, so you have this thing where they try and sell you all kinds of insurances for all these other things that the agreement you're liable for, and they kind of and then you have that process of I need to go and check the car to see what scratches are there, and then you return the thing, and there's a total lack of trust. right?
Yeah.
And it's literally, you feel like that. And I think that's a really interesting piece, because I don't sit there and go, I love my hire company, right? I just go, this is a painful exercise. I need to go and get this thing. I go, and I'm made to wait, and I sign this thing that is not in my best interests. And then I'm sold insurances to counteract the thing that I've committed to in the contract.
Yeah.
So total and utter relationship of distrust.
Yeah.
And then you sort of go, if that is the frame, you're absolutely right. You take that framing and you go, so this is my employer doing that. They don't trust me.
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't build a positive relationship.
Your attitude with a car hire company is usually like you're just waiting for them to screw you and hoping that they don't. And if the stuff you give employees as a compliance telegraphs the same thing, that it's like, hey, we really don't care what you do, because if we did care, we'd obviously make it easier for you. Like, no one gives even like a 3-page policy to someone that starts with like definitions, and expects that a person that's not an attorney is going to read it, right? I mean, I think maybe you meet some lawyers that think that, but I'm a lawyer. I'm like married to a lawyer. Neither of us practice anymore, but I don't think that about anybody. Because I don't like reading that stuff either. I send that stuff to my outside counsel now. I don't want to do that. It's the worst. And so the idea that you give that to employees and they'd be like, yeah, cool, I'll find time to do this. And also this definitely telegraphs that you care about it. The stuff we really care about people doing, we make very simple for them. And so you see that reflected. The analogy I'll sometimes give when I talk on this is compare Apple's product pages to their the iTunes user agreement. The product pages are beautiful. They're so simple and easy to parse. And the user agreement, I think I did this a couple years ago. I think it was something like 20 or 40 pages if you pasted it into Word. And it's just a little window you have to scroll through. It was just hopefully they've made that better since the last time I looked at it. But certainly not as good as the sales page, because they care a lot about whether you buy the product, and whether or not you fully understand the end user agreement is not nearly as important as the fact that you agree to it, because then you're shifting liability to yourself. And so that is where I think a lot of folks, when they overweight and they give too heavyweight stuff to their employees, they just totally botch it, because the message that people get, people read a lot of cues about the way you message something. And if the way you message something is akin to this frame that they already have that says, oh, this doesn't really matter, that's the frame they're going to take. If the frame is oh, this is more like school, then as soon as you're done with the quiz and you get the grade and you pass, you're done. That's right. The frame from school. You're not oh, okay, I'm going to go do something with this now. Most of the stuff that you probably learned in school, you don't use day to day. That's a bad frame as well. So I really like this. I really like the moment we're in. In terms of we might be able to come out of this a lot smarter as to how we communicate, by seeing how public health agencies are doing this really, really well. And the simplicity and the elegance and the agility with which they're communicating with the public they're exactly trying to do what compliance officers are trying to do, which is get people to behave the right way. They're just doing it really, really, really well. So I hope that we come out of this with I hope we come out of this smarter, and we see this and we borrow from that, and we use that as our frame of reference instead of school or legal, which I think are the two things that we really see a lot of this come from. And employees hate it. And it's not because the media isn't fancy enough or because the concept's boring. It's because it's the framework of it either being hostile or irrelevant. And so framing it around this is a specific thing you need to do. This is what safety teams have been doing for years anyway, and I think that really works. So my hope is we come out of this a lot smarter, and also that we come out of this soon, because this is just it's a weird time.
Yeah, but I think that it's interesting. One, having the backdrop of a really good case study and example for how to do this, and of course there's some examples for how not to do it. We can see authorities that communicate in terrible ways, right? Giving conflicting messages, overburdening people with stuff, don't make it clear. And I find it really interesting when you look at stuff when there's government advice that then needs to be explained.
Yep.
Right. They have failed in their task. And I've seen a number of news outlets or even just people on social media going, I will explain that to you in words of less than one syllable. I'll give you some. And you kind of know that they have succeeded when the thing that people are sharing is the government advice, because it's bang on the money and it doesn't need that translation service. And I think to my mind, it's a sort of, you get this quite a lot with policies, right? Where you get let's write the policy and then we'll write a note explaining the policy.
Yeah.
And then maybe we need to do something else to explain that. if what is in the hands of people isn't easily comprehensible, right, then somebody needs to do that translation service, as you say. And I think there's a lovely thing is sort of going, if there is stuff out there that you are seeing that is resonating with you, that you feel that is worthy for you to share with your friends and you focus on and you can return to, that is example A that you should be copying, and look at the stuff that doesn't work.
Yeah. I think, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the way that you see this stuff going out is this, I don't know, it's such a strange time. I mean, I do want to talk a little bit about like how, like, what would you do? What would you recommend people do right now? Because I think, so I've talked a lot about and after we come out of this, what can we learn? But I think too, like, there is this, so when stuff like this happens, and everyone's going to be a different space with this, right? So it took me a couple of days to kind of process and like really mourn that, like, wow, all the plans that we had are wiped out. And this is a radical change and everything. I don't even know if everybody's there yet, but it is. And I think if your attitude is like, hey, this is going to be kind of a blip and then we're going to go right back to how things were beforehand, I think that's unwise right now. I hope I'm wrong about that. And I hope that it really does go back to normal, like exactly as it was before. But, if we have a vaccine developed tomorrow, or I guess more importantly, a medication that they can roll out immediately, the economic downfall, the day that we're recording this, I think we hit like 3 million unemployment claims in the US. Right. It's like, I mean, it's the economic shakeout of this is like very dramatic. And so I think part of that too is like, and I think I want to pick up on this. If you work in risk and compliance, what should you be doing like right now?
Yeah, and I think it's a great question, because the temptation is to sort of sit back and go, right, the business needs to focus on itself. We are in kind of recovery mode. We're in emergency mode. We're in a temporary state where, hopefully this thing will go away, right? So we all fantasize about the scenario you outlined. And so the temptation, could well be one of two things, right? Which is to sit back and go, I'm going to back off a bit, right? I'm just going to let the business do its thing, because I don't want to be a burden or a nuisance. The second one is to kind of just pretend that nothing's changed, right? And so we will continue down the path that we were continuing before. Yeah. So we will roll out we had planned it was going to be, I don't know, cyber crime awareness week, right? And so we're going to do that come what may, right? Because this is business as usual, and we want to send a message to everybody that this is no let up. Just because you are at home, there is no excuse. Yeah. And I think both of those approaches, tempting as I know they are, come with flaws. And clearly the sitting back and doing nothing, I think, is really dangerous, because there's a whole load of new risks that are out there and challenges, and the continuing as if nothing has changed school of thought. I think risks being tone deaf to the challenges that people are facing. So I wouldn't be recommending either. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
I would agree that those are the two temptations, and that both of them are really bad. I think plowing ahead. So I think if you take either of those approaches right now, I think you are positioning yourself to have a deeply broken relationship with your business for a very long time. I think when I talk to folks on the compliance side, I'm sure it's the same on the risk side. A big driver is wanting to be seen as a business partner. And if your approach to a business crisis is to either sit on the sidelines or pretend it doesn't exist, that's not how partners behave. And so I'll take it maybe one at a time. So if you just keep plowing ahead with stuff right now, like yikes, can you imagine? So just again, it's a very low empathy approach. So rather than so imagine that you are the like a sales director, and let's imagine you're in a consumer-facing business, so you're especially hard hit right now. And you have managed a team of like 5 or 6, and your field reps all need to hit their quota because you are judged on hitting the aggregate amount, and your leads have just like gone. You're like goose egging sales, nothing's coming in, and you are like meeting with them all the time by video now, which is even harder in that field. And you are trying to, because it's so relational. So you're now meeting with video, trying to manage them by video, and you are really trying to think, like, what else can we do to bring in business? Because if we don't bring in business, everyone else in the company is in even more trouble because they depend on us doing it. It's not just our jobs, it's theirs too. And so imagine that, like, you're doing that, you have like a 2-hour meeting, you get everyone fired up, and like, you're like, okay, I feel like some hope here. I think we might be able to like really turn the engine back over again. And then like, as you're wrapping up the meeting, you hear all the email things go off. and like, and everyone's Zoom or whatever. And then like, everyone has just been assigned a 40-minute code of conduct training. How would you feel? Like, would you feel that the compliance or risk team understands what you do? And then it's just like, no. So I think, there's a lot of things that 2 weeks ago would have seemed like a really good idea to do that are not now. And so if 2 weeks ago, and largely any of that is stuff where you'd have compliance be front and center. Compliance should never be front and center. Compliance is an enabler to the business. It's not like, it's not something that if you have a really great compliance team, but you don't make any money, like you don't have a company anymore. So like compliance is it enables business to happen. It's not, and so it is always it's a support function. And so a lot of stuff that, in a really great economy, that you could do to position yourself as a compliance team, position yourself as a professional, that would have been a really good idea is not anymore. So like, you just want a compliance award. That's awesome. But like now is probably not the time to talk about it. Like that, because that is compliance front. Those inherently make compliance front and center at a time where you really want to be, everything needs to be about how compliance supports the business. So I think that's something that would be, so there's a lot of stuff that I would just say like stop doing for the time being, because it's compliance. It puts compliance front and center. It doesn't adapt, but that doesn't mean stop doing everything. It does mean, and so I think the reason those are the two temptations are because they're both easy. Like it's easy to pretend nothing happened. It's also easy to do nothing
right.
and like use this time to like, read or do some continuing education stuff. I think, so that's the first piece. For doing nothing, I think doing nothing is very dangerous because best case, you come out of this and people are like, oh yeah, compliance, wonder what they were doing. And like worst case, if your situations are really dire, you want to be the people who are really, really involved with how are we going to survive? What are we going to cut? You don't want someone that comes to you and says, I've decided to cut your budget and I've decided that you need to cut headcount. If doing nothing it feels very safe because like you can't get in trouble for doing the wrong thing.
Right.
But you are still deciding to do something. You're deciding to do nothing. You're deciding to sit on the sidelines. And probably most apt, like you are deciding to let things happen to you. You are waiting for other people to act and other forces to act upon you. And so I don't think that's an option either. I think the two things that I will say to do would be, number one, figure out any area where you're a gatekeeper and streamline it, like very rapidly. So like in the US, the example here would be, all of our restaurants are getting wiped out right now. This is brutal over here. I'm sure it is there too, as we're shutting everything down. It's awful. Like it's like we live in a really pedestrian area that has all these restaurants. It's brutal seeing it. And one of the things that the states have done here is to help them try and have some revenue coming in is now they can sell liquor and beer and wine curbside. You can go up as if it was a store, which usually you can't do most places. That's a compliance process. Getting that type of that's a licensing thing. That's a compliance process. That's a risk that you now have just like booze flowing everywhere. And that is something that the states responded very quickly to. Like we're going to adapt to the circumstance, make this easier, and deal with it. That's a great example of being responsive to it. I think this is a moment where I think if you have if your gifts and entertainment approval process is 8 days, no one's going to do it. If your third party process is 3 weeks to 3 months, no one's going to do it. And so all of your processes, and so the right response to that is not be oh, well, we'll clean it up afterwards, but streamline it. Because if you just clean it up afterwards, you may not have anything to clean up. Your job is to prevent that type of thing from happening. So you can't do the same thing you were doing, but you can adapt. That's where you show business value and also still do your job of mitigating risk. So the first thing would be that. The second thing is just communicating operationally. I think because we see people ask, how do I still communicate about compliance in this time? Be don't use the word compliance if you can help it. This is not the time to be pushing out your compliance newsletter to people. There's nothing wrong with doing that. But again, you got to read the room right now. To everything you do at this moment in time has to be, I understand what's going on right now. But I also understand that every dollar counts. And so we can't have money that's going out the door to fraud or bribery. Here's a checklist we put together for you guys on how to review an invoice.
Right.
Very operational communication. I think that's what people should be doing anyway. But now I think if you're trying to talk about like, hey guys, I know the sky is falling, but conflicts of interest are still important. Like if you're using compliance language, I think that will be received very poorly, because just no one has the time. Like people, I think generally don't have the time to translate that into their own world. That's the framing concept. But in the middle of a crisis, I think this is a time where my real hope is that compliance and risk teams come out of this with stronger business relationships, because they were able to say, okay, before, and I think too, to give maybe some people some freedom in this, up until the point of a crisis, every team, not compliance and risk, every business team is doing stuff that in a bad situation they wouldn't be doing. Everyone is doing stuff like that. So if you feel like you can't stop doing something because it would be like, oh, that means it was a bad idea. It doesn't mean that. It just means circumstances have changed. It's okay to stop doing stuff for right now to be like, oh, I need to do this other stuff instead. You just can't do nothing. And so I think as folks, sales teams and marketing teams, they're all cutting stuff and they're all responding to it. I think the only real mistake you can make is the doing nothing or the pretending nothing has happened, which is a different variant of that. I think adapting, you'll know quickly if the way you're trying to adapt doesn't work for the business, and at least then they're talking to you. And that's where I would say positioning is really important. You want to come out of this positioned as like, man, these people were super responsive. They were so helpful. Like we understand how compliance really helped us pull through this situation, manage risk in the moment of it, and then also adapt. And I think they would get more runway to do other stuff afterwards as well. You don't want to be like, 2 months later, people are like, okay, that's over now. We're at a new normal. Oh yeah, compliance. What is that?
Right. Yeah, and I think the bit that strikes me is I thought your comparative with advertising is interesting, right? Yeah. So companies now are pulling ads that are not appropriate. And we're seeing lots of examples of things that are filmed in bars, right? That just wouldn't happen. And there's been cases of I think there's a US mobile phone company that there was something involved sticking fingers in other people's mouths. There was something weird thing, right? But they've canned it. They've just gone, we are pulling that. I know, weird, right? But they've looked at it, and advertisers are looking and going, what is off message here? Feels inappropriate. Is not of the moment.
Yep.
And you should think the same way I think with compliance stuff, which is, why are they asking me to do this stupid stuff when I've got other things to worry about? And they're not helping me with the real concerns. And I think there's a fascinating piece here that says, actually, the other thing you need to be spending your time doing is going, what risks have changed?
Yep.
And there are new dynamics that need managing. So sitting there and going, my agenda is the same agenda it was when we were all sat in an office together, is really dangerous, because there are a whole new set of risks that exist with this new way of working.
Totally.
There are some things that were risky in an office environment that are less risky now. Yeah. And so you could argue, for example, if there are cultural challenges within the organization, maybe having people working from home, separating them, a bit like we do with kids at school who are, separate the gang so they don't, there may be some benefits to this thing that means you can ease off on some areas, but there are going to be a whole load of other risks and processes that are, that are just not fit for purpose. And I think, this is a time to sit there and go, what are the real risks we face in this organization, and think about the new ones. Yeah. Because there are definitely going to be some new things. It may be harder for people to commit fraud because they're not in a physical location where they can commit a certain type of fraud, but there may be a different kind of fraud they can commit. And pretending that things are all the same is not there. And I think that it is about helping people, but it's about recognizing as well that you need to be really reactive to this new environment and thinking outside the box. Because if you start to go, all we have done is taken people and we've moved them to a different location and everything else is normal, that is just not realistic. We all know, and particularly anyone listening with kids, right, who is having to do homeschooling while they work from home, you're going to need to be cut a whole load of slack and helped and supported through this thing, right? Because you're juggling, and maybe they've got relatives that are ill, or there's a whole load of things there that people are having to handle. Sensitivity to that is absolutely critical, and that's why I think the ad example that you used is really worth thinking about. Because and then the other bit that occurred to me was, if you don't jump ahead of this thing now, people will start to form habits. And it's impossible to change people. It's not possible. It's really hard. We all know this. It's really hard to change habits. So if you're not catching people at this early stage as they develop new ways of working, and if that habit is, I circumvent compliance processes because I justify it because it's an emergency, and I don't engage with them, right? That is going to become their modus operandi. And I think we are building working habits now that will stick for a long period of time, and they will stick even if you go back into the old physical location, because people will be used to doing that. So what we want people to do is to be building good habits. And the way that you do that is by engaging them early on. And we're at a stage now where I think that is still, people are still influenceable around that. But once we see weeks become months of these new processes, those things will bed in. And I think this is a really valuable opportunity to grab that. And so when people kind of go, we'll take a back seat and allow things to simmer down, they will simmer down in ways that you can't even contemplate. And I think this is a time for organizations to be thinking about ethics and culture and all of these pieces that feel like low priority items. But in this brave new world, people are going to be testing, and people are going to be tested in all sorts of new ways. And I think building those patterns and habits now really key. And of course, it's also a great opportunity if there are things that weren't working in the old world, behavior patterns of people, ways that you couldn't. This is a really good opportunity to engage people because it's a fresh start. Yes. And we should view this as a it's like New Year's resolution. There's a real opportunity here to say we can start afresh, and you can build relationships with people that might not have trusted you, might not like you, might not be responsive to you. It feels like a different environment, and you can use that.
Yeah, it's kind of like if you've ever had issues with your firm's culture, this is the moment where a new culture is being forged, because everyone's style of work is different. And if you sit this one out, and so I get, if you sit this one out, then complaining about it 3 months later is like, well, you had the chance, and now you're coming in with less credibility because everyone else was pulling together to forge this new culture, and you just sat it out. And I think too, I think if you felt this temptation to sit on the sidelines, I think some of the reason they've been is just hoping that this would be a shorter term thing than it looks like it's going to be. I 100% get that. Because I think it's also very just realistic to be everything we're saying you should be doing sucks. It sucks, and I'm sorry.
Just to add to the list of things that suck at the moment. Here you go. Right?
I mean, but honestly, think of it this way. We are all in a moment right now where everything that we thought we knew is wiped out. The financial market is just being obliterated. Our style of work is different. I had plans to hire a bunch of people 2 days before there was announced the pandemic. And that got, all this stuff is getting put on hold, wiped out, reconfigured. In the middle of all the anxiety you feel about this stuff, I understand how overwhelming it can feel to say, now you also have to figure out how to do your job differently while you're doing it from home. So I think it is totally realistic to say this sucks, that it is appropriate to think about and mourn the things you used to be doing, the sense of normalcy you used to have, the plans you had. It took me I think a good day to be man, I spent so much time on these plans, and now they're just they were good plans for the previous state of the world. And I think though, pretending that it's going to go away is not realistic. At a minimum, let me say this, it's not a plan. It's not doing nothing, pretending it's going to go away or doing the same thing is not a strategy. It is a plan to let things happen to you. And it's a plan to let your firm move on and develop a new culture without you. For us, so we have this product called Compliance Design Club, and we give out something free to all of our members every month, some type of compliance design tool. And we had to change what it was for April, because it was supposed to be this thing that was a awareness package for inappropriate computer usage at work, pornography. And we were wow, this is not helpful at all because no one's in an office now. And so we had to we'd already it's already made, it's already in the system. We already filmed out the marketing video for it. We had everything, we were good to go, and we had to scrap it and do something totally different that is more appropriate for managing remote risk and communicating about these concepts when you have a remote workforce. And so I very much get it. I was totally unhappy because I had filmed the video and I thought it was very funny because I'm always very pleased with my own work. And I was oh man. So I had to we had to scramble and redo it. I think that's just wise and prudent to be hey, look, and I think it's also very human to be and it sucks. The world has changed. We have to change what we're doing. And that sucks. I think, especially if you spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, people are very much on one pole or the other, is it's the apocalypse, or like everything's business as usual. It's like, the things have changed. We need to act differently. And I think I take a pretty balanced view of like, it's, to be optimistic, but also recognize that like, having to redo all your plans totally sucks. I get that. And so I'm living that right now myself. So I 100% understand it. I think it is. And so I want to be empathetic in how I say that, while also recognizing that like saying it sucks is not an excuse for doing nothing. Like, acknowledge that it's bad and then deal with it, because like the future of your company and your team depends on you being a part of it. And if you sit this one out now, you're not going to be, because they'll forge something new without you.
Right. And I'll tell you, as you were talking, there's one other thing that occurs to me, which is I've seen a lot of stuff on LinkedIn, which is the guide to working from home. And it's basic stuff like, you must have a shower in the morning. Do not work in your bedroom. Yeah. And I look at that stuff and I could imagine a temptation would also be, I need to be seen to be doing something. I will issue helpful advice like that.
Yeah.
And I sit there and just go, those things, people look at them and go, this is ludicrous. And they're also slightly tone deaf as well, because you go, part of the benefit of working from home is you don't have to shower in the morning. Maybe you want to shower at a different point. It's none of anyone's business. And yet that's the sort of standard advice that's coming out there. And I think one of the interesting things here is in looking at what you can do. I think it is worth thinking about being adventurous and sophisticated in what you communicate, not basic and patronizing. And there is a tendency, I think, sometimes to go, we'll get something out. Well, so Ricardo's told me I need to do something, right? I'm going to get something out. I'm going to get out a list of useful things. Is it really useful, or is it just you kind of trying to frame something basic in a useful context? What's useful is changing processes and communicating about that. What is not useful is kind of reminding people of the 10 things they need to do, none of which are of any interest or in insight. So I think as people are looking for inspiration for how to do this stuff, have a look at some of the terrible things there and don't be like those people.
Yeah, you have to add value to have credibility to keep talking about your thing. I'll put it that way. And so one of the ways that we tried to do that ourselves is with the antiviral campaign we're doing with you, where we are just releasing a bunch of free resources specific to like the coronavirus to folks. That's at antiviralcampaign.com, and then on Instagram with the same handle. And I think in addition, we're doing we've been donating money from a portion of our sales to the CDC Foundation. And then just like we think we have a skill set that's really helpful here. So do compliance people, because compliance people in this moment in time, they are the ones that can continue to protect the business from unnecessary risk, while also making the judgment call on what risk is necessary right now, and then calibrating processes to do that. I think the way when we're thinking about how do you communicate and how do you still stay top of mind with folks as a compliance professional during this time, the answer is like, you have to first be adding some type of value. So the best way you are communicating to people is like, we understand this is a crazy situation, so here's how we have dramatically simplified this process. Realistically, if you are like the vast majority of companies, you've probably like all of your processes were probably created with like way too many people involved. And will it take way too long? Business thinks they take way too long. It's like too many people involved with it. That's like super normal. But like, this is a good time to be like, you know what? You don't need 4 people to approve something. Maybe you need 1. And you don't usually that's happening because people are trying to distribute personal liability, or personal accountability. And so like, it's a classic thing where like you go and like, you have like where this is not unique. And none of what I'm saying now is unique to compliance. This happens at like every function at a big company. It's a function of scale. That you get like committees deciding things instead of people, which is a weird thing. And so but because basically it's easier for a committee, it's easier to rationalize why 5 people did nothing than actually just figure out, okay, who's really going to make the decision on this? And so this is a good time to like cut that stuff and say, you know what, we don't need this to go through 5 levels of approval and go up to a steering committee. Who owns this? You own this. You make the decision. I'm going to own this decision. We'll do this. We'll all be accountable. People that embrace that, I think, and come to this and say, I'm willing to have some skin in the game and be held accountable for stuff, are people that are going to be positioned as like fantastic business partners when this is all done. Because that's what the business is doing right now. They're all figuring out who owns what, how do we block and tackle, how do we go really, really fast. if they're going fast and compliance is not part of that, you are going to have problems, because now you have a heightened risk because everyone's stressed out and they're moving fast. And if compliance is over here on the sidelines, that's a problem. So I think the way I would tell you that you communicated with your business once a month, that now you should be probably doing at least once a week. But it should be, you'll get the credibility to do that by saying, this is what we have done in response to this. I should also say that, document what you did too is probably a good idea, to be like, okay, and now we're going to go back to normal after this. But I think what you also find is that, it's amazing to me that some of the, when we're coming back to the liquor license thing, wait, how now can this be this fast? Because I do stuff with the government, it takes forever. They're well, because it always could have been. And now everyone, and you're not going to go back to crisis mode because other stuff's going to happen. But coming out of this, I do think some of the efficiencies that you'll build into your processes, into procedures, some of them will stick too, and you'll have better ones. But again, you have to do it now. If you wait until it's over and you keep trying to do the same thing, I think what you'll discover is that people ignored you and you were end run the entire time. People just kept going around you to get the thing done. And then you may find out about it years from now. And yet people will understand that it was because of the coronavirus, but it'll also be well, why was the compliance team not involved? Well, that's why, is because those things that were developed for a good economic time no longer make sense now. Everyone's in that boat. It sucks, but we're in that boat. And so that's the thing we got to deal with now.
I think that's a beautiful note on which to end, and hopefully
everything sucks, but we're in the same boat.
Well, we're all going through it, right? And I think it's healthy. And look, I think the other thing too is this can be done with a smile, right? And I come back to that earlier piece around this doesn't need to be serious. Everybody knows this virus is a serious thing. There's loads of things happening. There are ways, and I think maintaining what's interesting about these new technologies and the way we're developing stuff is that actually we can break down borders. There's a lot of breaking down of borders that's interesting, that you're no longer in a corporate environment where you have to go knock on someone's office. Everybody has equal accessibility. There's a democratization here, and so you can build. I'm speaking to you more than I'm speaking to my physical neighbors these days, right? Which is a nice thing, and that's my positive kind of closeout for this piece, to say that if I can link London to Dallas, then then it can work within your organization in more confined spaces.
Yeah, and use video too. If you are, I know if you are a more introverted person, that using video with your team or with your other folks might seem awkward. 100% do it. It makes communicating so much easier than using the phone only. There's so many tools for this now. No, none of them are awesome. They all freeze all the time, but it's so much better than using the phone. And I know even if it feels weird, I really encourage you guys to do this. It really just adds an entirely different dimension to communication. We do daily video calls for my team, where we all just log in and check in with each other. And I really, really encourage you to do that too during this time.
And look, it gives you the perfect excuse to go and watch Ricardo's videos and my videos online, because you can just treat that as training for your compliance communication piece.
Yeah, so exactly. Good plug.
Exactly. With all of that said, thanks, Ricardo. I think that was a very productive, useful time. Hope the audience enjoyed it, and we'll do something along these lines very soon, I'm sure.
All right. Talk to you soon.
So that's it for another edition of the podcast. My huge thanks to Ricardo for appearing, and of course to you for listening. For more details on his Compliance Design Club, you can visit compliancedesignclub.com, where you can sign up for Ricardo's newsletter and learn more about the products that Broadcat produces. To find out more about human risk, visit human-risk.com. Now, if you've got any thoughts or questions about the topics we discussed in the podcast, do let us know. You can do that on social media, or you can email me, christian@humanrisk.com. And as ever, feedback of whatever kind on the podcast is always welcome. If you're not already subscribed to the Human Risk Podcast, then you'll find it wherever you get your quality audio content. I'll be back very soon with another episode in this series, but in the meantime, stay safe and thanks for listening.